and some thanks go to the band for playing our opening music. The Clevelanders play the sounds of the city, from the frenetic surge of rush hour to the din of dimly lit bar. Based in Astoria, Queens, the Clevelanders are Scott Borchett on piano, Brian Cleve on trumpet/fugal, and Kate Trahan on vocals. They're lucky to be joined by the full rhythm section of Brian Graber on drums and Johnny Barnes on bass. They can't wait to bring their combination of swing, bop, stride, standard, and modal jazz back to a live audience, and they hope that you all enjoy this afternoon with the Clevelanders and Queens Historical Society. I'd also like to welcome you in and wish you happy holidays. Thank you for coming in to this year's virtual Holly Tour. We're going to look inside some of the museums and historical sites that Flushing has to offer. My name is Jaron Halfpap, and I'll be your MC for the evening. And I'd like to direct your attention momentarily before we start to the video description. You might have to scroll down a little bit. There, you'll be able to find important links like how to donate and support your cultural institutions. I'd also like to take a little bit of time to thank our sponsors, Con Edison and New York City & Company. Thank you for your support. If you contribute during the show, you'll be able to have the opportunity to have one of your messages pop up on stream. And without further ado, first up we have the Bound House.
Welcome to the Bound House. Today we are presenting a virtual Holly Tour program celebrating the holiday traditions of colonial America. We will start our presentation by sharing a brief history of the home's residents and their long-lasting contributions to religious tolerance in America. Then, we will explore some early American holiday traditions, followed by a pre-recorded demonstration of how to make a delicious, colonial-inspired Bakewell tart. John Bound was born in England in 1627 and came to the American colonies with his sister and father in 1649. Soon after, the family moved to the area of Flushing, and in 1656, John Bound married his first wife, Hannah Feek. The Bound House was built in 1661 when the area we now know as New York was a Dutch colony called New Netherland, which was controlled by the Dutch West India Company. The New Netherland colony existed from 1613 until 1664, after which point it became the British colony of New York. One incredibly unique aspect of the home's history is that 9 generations of John Bound's descendants continued to live in the house until the 1940s. Originally, the house only consisted of this one room, with more rooms being added throughout its 300-year history. The hall was the center of activity for the growing Bound family. In this small space, they would cook, clean, sleep, and socialize. This was also the room in which John Bound and Hannah Feek Bound held their Quaker meetings. As you may know, Quakerism is a sect or a type of Christianity. The Quaker religion is called the Religious Society of Friends. Hannah was actually a Quaker before John, and it was in the same year of their marriage that he officially converted to the Quaker religion. Flushing was a popular destination for Quakers from England due to the promises of freedom of conscience, or the right to worship the religion of one's choice, which was outlined in the Flushing Charter of 1645. But this right to religious freedom was threatened when Peter Stuyvesant became the Director General of the colony in the late 1640s. In his attempt to strengthen the power of the Dutch Reformed Church within the Dutch colony, Stuyvesant sought to restrict the public worship of Quakers. The people of Flushing then felt they had to take a stand against Stuyvesant. In protest to his restrictive measures, a number of Flushing residents signed a kind of protest letter known as the Flushing Remonstrance, and this was the year 1657. The Remonstrance is often considered a precursor to the provision of religious freedom in the Constitution's Bill of Rights, which was ratified in 1791. As previously mentioned, the Bound family held Quaker meetings in their one-room home. Hannah and John must have been aware of the risk they were taking by hosting these meetings, yet they continued to have these gatherings in defiance of the law. Eventually, in 1662, Stuyvesant received word that the Bound House hosted regular Quaker meetings and sent his sheriff to Flushing to arrest John Bound. John Bound was brought before Peter Stuyvesant in New Amsterdam and subsequently banished from the colony. He then traveled to Holland to argue his case before the Dutch West India Company. By citing the Flushing Charter and the promise of religious tolerance that was guaranteed in it, Bound won his case and was able to return to the New Netherland colony. As we have explained, religious tolerance and freedom of conscience were incredibly important to the Bound family, as well as to early colonial American society as a whole. These ideas have certainly informed diverse winter holiday traditions, with many religions celebrating during the same time of year. The winter holidays bring together the most multicultural of customs. Over time, traditions from many countries have been adapted and melded to form the holiday season as we know it today. In North America, immigrants brought these customs to the New World throughout the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. I am sorry to have to tell you that the Quakers did not celebrate Christmas. So, late December in 17th century Flushing, during John Bound's time, may have been a disappointment to many of you. They may have been familiar with celebrations happening in Manhattan, but as far as we know, those celebrations did not cross the river to Flushing. It is true that John Bound's children would not have celebrated the holidays in any grand way, but don't worry, they still had fun throughout the year. For many Quaker children, every day was quite special. Quakers doted on their children, who were often well-clothed and well-educated. You may be wondering why Quakers did not celebrate in Christmas festivities. During this early American colonial period, religious groups like the Quakers and Puritans associated Christmas celebrations with overindulgence and extreme behaviors. This revelry was often viewed as debauchery, and members of these religious sects were strongly opposed to, quote, non-Christian activities. Here we have a side-by-side comparison of a Quaker meeting with a scene of holiday revelry. On the left, we see Quakers gathered around a speaker, attentively and enthusiastically listening to her sermon, while on the right, we see Twelfth Night revelers engaged in drinking, feasting, dancing, and illicit behaviors. The contrast could not be more striking. Of course, these attitudes toward Christmas celebrations changed and evolved throughout the centuries. By the later 18th century, influenced by prosperity and by nearby Manhattan, even the Bound family would likely have taken advantage of the spirit of the season. They may have even traveled to Manhattan to visit family and to enjoy seasonal celebrations. In line with the changing attitudes toward winter celebrations was what can only be described as the rebranding of Santa Claus, one of the most recognizable symbols of the Christmas season. In Dutch tradition, Santa Claus was known as Saint Nicholas. Saint Nicholas was actually a bishop of Turkish nationality. He was known for his generosity to children, an idea that became the origin of the tradition of Santa Claus bringing gifts to children at Christmas. This practice of gift-giving acted as a reminder of the gifts brought to baby Jesus by the three Magi. In Holland, Saint Nick arrives on December 6th, his feast day. The good children get the gifts, the bad ones get the lump of coal. From this we get the phrase, naughty or nice. This is a tradition that might have been known in early Flushing, since New York was, after all, settled by the Dutch. In fact, in this 1652 print, we see St. Nicholas vindicating himself, or, in other words, improving his image. The man on the left-hand side tells St. Nicholas to, quote, keep out, to which St. Nicholas responds, oh, sir, I bring good cheer. This indicates that already in the 17th century, there was a desire by some to associate St. Nicholas with good deeds and positive behaviors. The earliest example of the modern American image of Santa Claus is found in this 1862 illustration by Thomas Nast, created during the period of the Civil War. Another important symbol of the winter holidays is the beloved Christmas tree. The Christmas tree actually originated in Germany and was brought to England by Queen Victoria in the early 19th century, after her marriage to Prince Albert, who was German. In the days before electricity, the trees were lit with candles on Christmas Eve, and buckets of water were kept on hand due to the fire hazard. This tradition was then brought to America, becoming common in households celebrating Christmas throughout the United States. On the right, we see a photograph of a past Holly tour at the Bound House, with a Christmas tree displayed in the parlor. When the Bound House is open to the public in the holiday season, the rooms are adorned in traditional American decorations, making the house a very cheerful and welcoming place. All cultures celebrate the season with gatherings of friends and family. These gatherings always involve food, some of which is associated with the holiday. Although the degree to which Bound descendants celebrated the winter holidays is debatable, they would certainly have had recipes used for celebrations, gatherings, or special days. With the addition of the Bound House kitchen in the 18th century, the family would have prepared their celebratory dishes and baked in this cozy room warmed by the large fireplace and hearth. One such recipe the Bound family may have baked was the Bakewell tart. This dessert is still quite popular and is a perfect treat for the upcoming holiday festivities. The Bakewell tart is a specialty dessert that hails from the village of Bakewell, Derbyshire, in what is known as the Peak District in northern England. It is a beautiful, hilly area that has been home to lead mines and quarries, and also the site of cotton mills during the Industrial Revolution. Much of it is now designated parkland, popular with both British and foreign tourists. Bakewell is about 8.5 miles away from Matlock, England, which is where we believe the Bound family lived before emigrating to the North American colonies. The Bakewell tart was originally a soft raspberry and egg pudding in a soft crust made during the Tudor times. In the early 1800s, when travel to the rural areas of England was becoming popular, inns and stagecoach stops sprung up offering room and board. One of these inns, the Rutland Arms, claims to be the originator of the Bakewell recipe. Apparently, there was confusion in how to assemble the dessert, and the result was a stratified crust with a raspberry jam and cake. At this time, during the Victorian era, more people were literate and printed books became more affordable. There was a new market for books on how to run a home and cook, and the Bakewell recipe started, appearing in these publications, which led to several different versions of the recipe becoming popularized. In fact, if you go to Bakewell today, there are a few competing shops that have their own version of the Bakewell tart. There are also commercial versions of the Bakewell tart you can buy in Great Britain and Ireland, as easily as you can buy a boxed cake or pie in American supermarkets. This is the list of ingredients used to make our version of the Bakewell tart, which we will make available to you after the program. So now, we'll tune into a short video of a Bakewell tart recipe tutorial presented by Emily Vieira Haley, an educator with the Bound House, as well as a talented baker.
Hello, my name is Emily Vieira Haley, and I'm an educator at the Bound House in Flushing, Queens. Today we're making a Bakewell tart. The version we're going to make is from a recipe in the New York Times food section. I researched and read through many recipes, both on British and American websites. Some recipes were very intricate, calling for an icing or with a cherry filling, and there was a beautiful one in the Great British Bake Off. But I chose this one because it was simpler and it was more true to an 18th century busy kitchen. It also has measurements that we use in the United States, and it keeps to the common elements of raspberry jam, a shortbread crust, and an almond flavor. If you wish, the recipe, along with measurements and ingredients, will be available to you as a PDF on the Bound House website. Let's get started. For this recipe, you will need flour, sugar, salt, baking powder, almond flour, almond extract, raspberry jam, butter, eggs, and sliced almonds. Preheat your oven to 350 degrees. We will start by making our dough for the shortbread crust. Put the flour, sugar, and salt in a large bowl, drop in the chunks of butter, and using your hands or a pastry blender, work the butter into the flour until it is evenly distributed. You'll have large and small butter bits, and that's fine. Beat the egg and water together and drizzle it over the dough. I've already done that. And toss the dough until it is evenly moistened. Using your fingertips, reach into the bowl and mix and knead the dough until it comes together. Take your dough and turn it out onto a lightly floured work surface. Gather into a ball and work it with the heels of your hands until it sticks together and becomes rather like Play-Doh. Flatten it into a disc and then chill in the refrigerator for about a half an hour. While the dough is chilling, we will work on our filling. Whisk the almond flour, all-purpose flour, baking powder, and salt together. Then working with a mixer, beat the butter and sugar together on medium speed for 3 minutes until pale and creamy. Then gradually beat in the eggs and the almond extract. Then reduce the mixer speed and add half of the dry mixture until incorporated, and then the rest mixing only until it disappears into the batter. Finish blending with the spatula because you don't want to overmix. Take your crust dough out of the refrigerator. Sprinkle flour liberally again on your work surface, and with a rolling pin, roll out your dough. Flip it every now and then to make sure it doesn't stick until it is slightly larger than your tart pan. Transfer it to your buttered tart pan and crimp any edges that may flop over the edges of the pan. With a fork, sporadically pierce the bottom of the dough in all 4 quadrants. Spread the raspberry jam evenly over the crust and then top with the almond filling, covering the jam as completely as you can. I find it helps if you use an offset spatula. Don't worry, it does not have to be perfect. If you like, sprinkle with the sliced almonds. Bake the tart for 35 to 38 minutes until it is lightly browned on top. And here it is, the Bakewell tart. Let cool for a few minutes at least before eating. It is delicious eaten either warm or cool down, and pairs well with a cup of hot tea. Cheers. I'd also recommend enjoying with a bit of delicious warm vanilla custard. Enjoy, and happy holidays.
Hey. Thank you, Bound House. Next up, we have Flushing Town Hall. Flushing Town Hall is one of the best places in Flushing to find a musical performance. So let's go on a tour.
Hello, my name is Sammy Abouchamez, and I am Deputy Director of Flushing Town Hall, which is the gorgeous historic building you see behind me. We're right here on Northern Boulevard in Flushing, Queens, across the street from the Armory and the Quaker Meeting House. Flushing Town Hall was built in 1862 to be the town hall for the city of Flushing before the incorporation of the city of New York in 1898. Let's have a closer look. This is an exhibit we have been doing outside for the last couple months. These are all artworks submitted by the community. The exhibit is titled Grief and Resiliency, Call and Response, Grief, Resiliency, and Hope. In response to the many crises that we are facing, the COVID pandemic and the structural racism pandemic that's long-term, and our communities are grieving, but Flushing Town Hall is doing our best to give outlets for that. So this is our beautiful front portico. As you can see, Flushing Town Hall, like I said, was built in 1862 to serve as the town hall for the city of Flushing. And it welcomed back soldiers from the Civil War who had fought. And it served as obviously a meeting place, a seat of government, as well as a place where people came and celebrated, and a theater where people made speeches. One of the most famous speakers was Frederick Douglass, who spoke here in 1865. We had Tom Thumb, some other luminaries, P.T. Barnum. New York Community Bank was started in our gift shop. Let me give you one more view of that beautiful portico. We just renovated this portico within the last few years, restoring all the woodwork. One of the most beautiful things about the building is those arched windows, those archways. You can see that on our logo. Let's have a look inside. This is our entrance hallway. Normally it would be filled with people excited to come for a world music or jazz concert or one of our many education programs. These are all these fantastic programs we've been planning, which obviously have been closed for the last few months while we've been doing mostly online programming. Beautiful staircase. This is an exterior landmark, but not an interior one, but the staircase is one of the elements that we retained when we rebuilt the building, the interior, starting in the 1990s. Talk more about that history in a minute. I'm going to take a little walk into our gift shop. Gift shop sells work of local artists, Queens-based artists, as well as some other artists. A lot of beautiful stuff here. We're not currently open, but possibly by the time you see this video, we may be opening 1 or 2 days a week. We're currently in plans for how we're going to reopen the building. And we're really grateful for all the folks who stayed in touch with us by watching all of our online programming. But I anticipate that within the next few months, we may be able to start having exhibits again. Let me give you a peek into our gallery. We have a gorgeous gallery space, which regularly hosts art exhibits year-round, but we've taken down the last one and we don't have one coming up. But it's a gorgeous space. You can see those windows. Let me see, there's another nice one behind me. This is what the building's really known for. These beautiful Romanesque Revival windows that you can see both from the inside and outside. So this is our gallery space. We also have, or we typically have had, jazz concerts and chamber music concerts here, small workshops, that sort of thing. It's another room in our gallery. Like I said, by the time you see this video, we may be able to announce some exhibits coming to Flushing Town Hall in the next few months. So stay tuned for that. We have a beautiful garden as well. I just want to give you a quick peek. Hopefully we'll be able to have some more outdoor programming in summer of 2021. Look at those beautiful tin ceilings. We're going to walk up to our theater, the centerpiece of our activities, and I'm going to go right up this staircase. Our theater seats 300 people, and we have historically done lots of fantastic jazz programming. These are some of the many amazing jazz artists who lived in Queens. About 20 years ago, we developed this Queens Jazz Trail map, which shows the many great jazz artists who've lived in Queens. Dizzy Gillespie, who just had a birthday, is buried here in Flushing. You can see Louis Armstrong obviously has the Armstrong House, which is nearby. And a lot of other greats like Billie Holiday, Count Basie, etc. have lived in Queens. So this is our beautiful staircase. And this is one of my favorite views, to be honest. The view of the Quaker Meeting House across the street, built in 1695. Much older than Flushing Town Hall, but the connection to our mission is very clear. The Quakers sent a remonstrance in 1657 to Governor Stuyvesant, complaining that the Quakers were not allowed to practice, and the town elders of Flushing called for religious freedom. They called for freedom not just for Quakers to worship, but for Jews and Hindus and Muslims as well. A surprisingly progressive statement from 1657. And when eventually it was resolved and they stopped having to practice in secret, the Quakers built that meeting house across the street, 1695, and it's still in operation. I think that's part of the tour. So its connection to our mission at Flushing Town Hall is our commitment to diversity in programming, our commitment to presenting global arts, to welcoming the whole world in. That mission's been put on hold physically for the last few months, but it is something we're continuing to do through our arts education programs online. And I hope you go to our website, flushingtownhall.org, to check out our many great online programs. This is our gorgeous 300-seat theater. Most of the seats are out, but you can see the lovely balcony behind me. The great thing about this theater is that we have the ability to remove seats. So our movable seats, which you can see there, are taken out of this orchestra floor. So sometimes we have parties here and events where you don't have very many people seated. And hopefully we'll be able to take advantage of that too when we start to allow people back in the building. But we've done some fantastic things here, like a version of Romeo and Juliet put on by Queens College a number of years back that used every space in the building, had some people in the boxes. It's a really versatile space. One of the reasons we can do a lot of different kinds of things. Our programming is multidisciplinary. We present music and dance and theater, arts education programs. This is what we call our green room. You can see me recording behind you. We use this as a dance space. This is a space for concessions during our concerts, a space for workshops for kids. When we have education programs for young people, this is a nice sensory room for those on the autism spectrum. So it's a really nice, versatile use space. And we're about to get to my favorite part of the tour, everyone's favorite part of the tour. So Flushing Town Hall, like I said, was built in 1862, and it served a variety of purposes starting at that point. In 1898, the city became incorporated, and this was no longer the seat of government. Starting in about 1898 or 1897, it became a courthouse. So what you just saw, the theater, was what we built starting in the 1990s. When we, by we I mean our organization, Flushing Council on Culture and the Arts, moved into the building and renovated it, turning it into the cultural center you see today. But from about 1897 or 1898 till 1960, it was a courthouse. So what is now our artist dressing room is what used to be a jail cell. So we like to give our artists some security from the rest of the world, I guess you might put it. Anyway, so this is our artist dressing room, where artists are free rather than in chains. And another little part of the room. This is actually right behind me is that walled up where the mirror is, actually used to be the passageway where prisoners were brought up. And the elevator that we have is the other, what used to be the other holding cell. That's the elevator behind me. So, thanks for coming on this quick little tour with me. We're really grateful for everyone who has been watching our online program, all those of you out there who have been donating to help support us. It is a really difficult time, as I'm sure all of you know, for arts organizations. Our mission is to bring people together physically in the same space to celebrate music and dance and the arts. We've been doing our best with the online programming, so like I said, we're really grateful for everyone who's been watching the programs, commenting, liking, and sharing, and everyone who's been donating to help us out get through these difficult times. Your donations help support the artists that we are continuing to employ to make online programs, help support our staff who are putting on those programs and putting everything together. So it's really meaningful, while we can't see you in person, that so many of you are still engaging with us. I'm going to end, since this is a holiday tour, with one of my favorite tunes on the violin. Of course, I'm an Arabic violin player, so it's not going to really sound like it should, but enjoy Greensleeves. Happy holidays.
All right, thank you so much, Flushing Town Hall. So, next up, we have the Friends Meeting House, which is an open place of spiritual fulfillment that has been a fixture of the Flushing landscape for centuries. So, let's get a tour of them real quick.
Hi, welcome in. Thanks for joining our virtual tour. I'm Jeff Guyton, and I'm the clerk of Flushing Monthly Meeting. And welcome to Flushing Friends Meeting House, which is also known as the old Quaker Meeting House. Thanks for joining us, and we really hope that when COVID is over, you come and physically meet with us and take a tour with us in person. So welcome in, and the first thing you might notice when you enter the gate is the stark contrast between crazy busy Northern Boulevard, and I drove over on the LIE. And then when you enter the meeting house grounds, it's an oasis. It's peaceful, and it's a transition from a very hustle-bustle, busy dog-eat-dog world into the very peaceful environs of the Quaker Meeting House. Now, the next thing that you might wonder about, why there's no entrance to the building facing Northern Boulevard. And that's an analogy to Quaker worship, in that the central belief of Quakers is that every human being has an inner light. And when Quakers worship, they sit as a community in silence and they turn inward to receive divine guidance, the inner light. So it makes sense that you would turn away from the busyness of the world and Flushing Boulevard in order to connect to what Quakers call the divine inner light. John Bown purchased and donated land for this burial ground in 1676. There are over 140 Quakers recorded as being buried here. Prior to 1835, Quakers did not use headstones, so there are many more people buried here than there are stones. John Bown and his family are buried here, as are the abolitionists William Burling and Matthew Franklin. Turning toward the entrance to the meeting house, you may notice a new banner. And aside from the central belief in the inner light, Quakers do not have a creed. Instead, they have testimonies that are sometimes referenced to spices: simplicity, peace, integrity, community, equality, and stewardship. And you have seen on the porch boxes, those are for our CSA food distribution, which takes food from farmers to people, and we do that every Thursday night here at the porch of the meeting house. The belief in the inner light is at the heart of the Quaker belief in equality. And although I mentioned that Quakers turn inward in prayer, they believe that they must then go out into the world to act upon the divine guidance that they've received. The Quaker belief in the inner light and the Quaker testimonies account for the reason that Quakers have been at the forefront of the abolition movement, women's suffrage, the civil rights movements, and the many movements for equality that continue to this day. So we're walking into our worship space now. And here we sit for an hour or more, an hour. Sometimes it's silent, and frequently people may stand and minister from the inner light or what message may come to them through their contemplation. I mentioned that the burial ground was purchased and donated by John Bown in 1676. John Bown's house was built in 1661 and stands just a couple of blocks away. John Bown and John Rodman purchased the land for building the meeting house in 1692, and the first meeting in the meeting house occurred in November of 1694. Quakers held their meetings at John Bown's house for 30 years prior to the building of this meeting house, but some very important events took place prior to building this meeting house. In 1657, a Quaker named Henry Townsend was arrested, imprisoned, and fined for holding Quaker meetings in his home. The area was under the jurisdiction of Peter Stuyvesant, who thought that everyone should belong to the Dutch Reformed Church and had forbidden anyone from holding a Quaker meeting or to host a Quaker in one's home. In response to this persecution, the town clerk, the sheriff, and 28 other settlers drafted a document calling for religious freedom and an end to religious persecution. That document, as you may well know, is known as the Flushing Remonstrance, and it was signed December 27, 1657. The town clerk was jailed and banished, and the other signers were heavily fined. It is worth noting that several signers of this important document later became Quakers. John Bowne, whose wife Hannah Feek had become a Quaker, allowed Quaker meetings to take place in his home despite knowing the risks. This led to his arrest in 1662, when he was imprisoned and fined. Being a prisoner of conscience, John Bowne refused to pay the fine and refused to leave when his prison door was left open. This led to his banishment. He was put on a boat to Holland, but told that he could get off wherever he wished. After going to Ireland and England, he made his way to Holland, where he met with the representatives of the Dutch West India Company that had granted the charter to establish the settlement at Flushing. There, he presented his case for religious freedom. As a result, the Dutch West India Company sent a letter to Peter Stuyvesant in 1663, ending the persecution of Quakers and establishing the right to religious freedom and freedom of conscience. So the Flushing Remonstrance is seen by many people as a precursor to our Bill of Rights, drafted over 100 years before our Constitution was adopted in 1787. This worship room is the oldest part of the meeting house, which is the oldest house of worship in New York State, and the second oldest in the country that has been in continuous use, which is the miracle to me. That continuous use includes a period when British soldiers occupied this room during the Revolutionary War. The benches are not quite as old as the meeting house because the British soldiers burnt the original benches and a picket fence for firewood. The British soldiers used this room as a stable, a storage room, and as a hospital. The benches are still quite old, and in this close-up, you'll see that the carved graffiti is so old that the initials of this person were carved with serifs at the tips of the letters. You'll notice that the worship room remains simple and unadorned. This is the result of the Quaker testimony of simplicity. For Quakers, there's always been a link between the testimonies of simplicity and peace. In short, it is believed that the desire for luxuries creates a demand for the raw materials needed to produce those luxuries, which in turn leads to the many wars fought, fueled by that need for raw materials. They also saw a connection between luxuries and the exploited labor and the slave labor used to satisfy the appetite for luxuries. It is worth noting that Quakers don't actually consider their meeting houses to be sacred. It's the divine presence that friends share in worship that they consider to be sacred. So early friends were known to meet in fields and homes and during persecution in the woods with the help of Native Americans. Still, this building is an important symbol of freedom. The ceiling was originally open with gallery seating all around. It was enclosed in 1763 in order to create a school upstairs for children whose parents could not afford to pay for schooling. And this happened well before the public school system was established in New York City in 1842. In 1717, the meeting house was enlarged to accommodate more people. This wall consists of panels that could be lowered to accommodate separate meetings and raised to accommodate a very large meeting. Quakerism is remarkable for considering all of its members to be clergy, and women were considered equal to men in their ministry. In the larger world, women had different spheres of activities than men, so the women could meet on that side of the panels when necessary, but the panels could be raised to form one large meeting when needed. As we come out of the worship room, we enter this room, which is now used as a social room. And we can see several displays about Quaker history. And on this wall is a history of peacemakers. We'll focus for a couple of minutes on John Woolman, who is a very important figure in Quaker history. When he was a young man, John Woolman worked as a clerk in a shop. In the course of his work, he was once told to write up a bill of sale for the purchase of a slave. Although he did what he was told, this action preyed on his conscience and helped lead him to become one of the most important abolitionists in the Society of Friends. John Woolman's convictions were so strong that he began to wear undyed clothing because he knew that slaves were made to work on indigo plantations in the production of dyes. He traveled up and down the eastern part of the U.S. visiting Quaker meetings, including Flushing Meeting, to try to convince others that holding slaves was incompatible with Quaker beliefs. In his travels to preach against slavery, John Woolman visited the homes of many fellow Quakers. When visiting Quakers who held slaves, he insisted on either paying for their labor, and if this was not allowed, he'd sleep outdoors in the fields. There's a couple of additional things to note in this room. One is the architectural support that's known as a ship's knee. That's a natural right angle formed between a tree trunk and a branch or a tree trunk and its root. There's one down here, and there are more ship's knees upstairs. And next we have a display case. This is a display that marks the visit of George Fox, the founder of the Religious Society of Friends, to the Bound House in 1672. George Fox preached a sermon under 2 oak trees. Here we have a piece of one of the trees and a piece of the stone marker that replaced the trees, presumably after they withered. It was after a long period of searching that George Fox came to believe that no person needed an intermediary to connect to the divine, and this is at the heart of Quaker beliefs. Here we are on the 2nd floor of the meeting house where the children's meetings are held. You'll note that there are several extraordinarily long white oak beams that span the length of the meeting house. Those hold the roof up. Here are 2 additional ship's knees. It's perhaps fitting to end our tour with a reproduction of the original of the Flushing Remonstrance. The edges were burned in a fire, but thankfully this plea for religious freedom survives today. This document and John Bound's banishment led to the famous response of the Dutch West India Company to Governor Stuyvesant, which stated, "The consciences of men at least ought ever to remain free and unshackled." Both documents are important precursors to the freedom of religion and separation of church and state established in the Bill of Rights. The Flushing Friends Meeting House was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1967 and a New York City landmark in 1978. So I hope that you'll join us in person someday when it's safe to do so. And you'll be welcome to experience a Quaker meeting, then a little bit of coffee and some fellowship afterwards. When COVID is over, we really hope to embrace you in person. For now, you're more than welcome to join us on Zoom, on Sundays, and to do so, we worship from 11 to noon, as we always do in person here, and then our fellowship is 12 to 1. So on Zoom now, we worship from 11 to 12, and if you'd like to join us sometime, just the email is jeffreyguyton@hotmail.com. That's jeffreyguyton@hotmail.com. If you email me, I can send you the Zoom link to get on, and we would love to join you for a gathered and spiritually resonant worship experience. Thanks so much for joining us on our virtual tour today, and we look forward to meeting you soon.
All right. Thank you so much for all of that history, Friends Meeting House. Next up, we're going to head over to the Latimer House, the home of an important American inventor, artist, and civil rights advocate.
Good afternoon, everyone, and happy holidays. And I just want to thank you all for the 2020 annual Holly Tour. And this is the virtual edition. And although it looks very different this year, I'm very excited for this opportunity to share our special exhibition, Homeland, with all of you. Race and Revolution Homeland is an examination of systemic family separation, bounty hunting, and incarceration of runaway slaves in the past and migrant families in the present. Homeland is the fourth art exhibition in a series curated by Katie Fuller that confronts the historical patterns of systemic racism in the United States. In this installment of Race and Revolution, of the Race and Revolution series, Homeland exhibits work by 8 artists, all working in a wide variety of mediums. So you can see on this slide, we have a list of our featured artists: Ann Lewis, Jade Sacker, Lorena Molina, Peter Hoffmeister, Sejean Park, Sheridan McKnight, Sylvia Hernandez, and Tasha Duget. And so today we will walk through the exhibit together, and then we'll take a closer look at the artwork. So I'm going to share a video with you. It's very short. I'm going to talk a little bit about the context for the exhibit and also some of the historical context about Lewis Latimer and his family and their relationship to family separation in the context of slavery and the Fugitive Slave Act. And then we'll come back into the slides and I will share, we'll look closer at each of the artworks themselves, and I'll talk about a little bit more about the artists as well. So you'll bear with me. Here we go into our video. So you'll see the exterior of the house, and one of the works on the porch is by Anne. And as we walk into the house, you'll see the exhibition of the contemporary artworks are sitting right alongside of our permanent collection. And so I'll also talk a little bit more about that. So land holds our histories, but it also has tremendous power and strength. Within the context of this exhibit, the home also becomes centered as the exhibit places contemporary artworks amongst the artifacts that depict Latimer's story and throughout the home in which he lived. Homeland looks at the influence of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 on Lewis Latimer's family, focusing on the tactics used to detain, deport, and re-enslave runaways, and brings this legacy that Lewis fits squarely within into dialogue with current practices used by immigration customs enforcement today to control the influx of immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. The exhibit pairs true stories of those who escaped slavery or self-emancipated in the years surrounding the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 with current experiences of families attempting to migrate to the United States with the hopes of finding a home in the land of the free. These works have been installed throughout our permanent collection, which draws into sharp relief the constant drum of oppression throughout history, and specifically the ways in which the government has utilized and enforced family separation as a means of oppression. Lewis Latimer was an engineer, inventor, and an artist, an all-around brilliant Renaissance man. Born in 1848, he was the son of formerly enslaved parents. Lewis was born free in Massachusetts just before the passing of the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850. His parents, George and Rebecca, escaped from enslavement in Norfolk, Virginia before Lewis's birth in 1842. They made it all the way to Boston, where George was arrested and detained. Boston by then was becoming the center of the abolitionist movement, and George's wrongful imprisonment became a galvanizing case for the abolitionists. Abolitionists were eventually able to raise enough money to purchase George's freedom, but in creating a protest surrounding his imprisonment, they actually laid the groundwork for eventually repealing the act. During the time that George was in prison, Rebecca, his wife, was hidden safely by abolitionists in the area. Once they were reunited, George and Rebecca would have 4 children, with Lewis being the youngest. But it is believed that George, with the notoriety of his case, lived in constant fear of being recaptured. And in 1857, he would leave his family, and that would be the same year that Dred Scott fought for and lost the rights to his freedom and personhood. So while Homeland focuses on how the government has used family separation as a means of control and oppression, the artwork also celebrates the strength and resilience of those who have defied systemic oppression because they believe in the power of family and the human right to migrate for a better way of life. And so this is kind of the last bit of the video, but as you can see, especially if you've been on the Holly tour before, you'll see that the artwork is sitting just alongside all of our permanent collection. So now I will take us into the next slide. So I'm going to show 2 works first that you guys can take a look at in further depth on your own. So this first work by Lorena Molina, Building a Home Out of Dirt, is part of the Nothing Hurts Like Home series, which explores the artist's complex relationship with homemaking as someone who's experienced displacement because of war. Now, this is a still from a video. So if you would like to spend a little bit more time and watch the video in its entirety, you can visit our website, lewislatimerhouse.org, to view this artwork. I will also link the direct link to this video in the chat. But if you go on our website and you're looking for the video, you can find it under the exhibitions tab. So within this work, the artist performs, she's in a cornfield and she's basically building this mound out of dirt. And every time that this mound starts to gain size or mass, it starts to crumble. She's using land that has been overworked. So the work is very meditative and she's moving slowly, but it is showing us sometimes the futility that people can be faced with or feel when trying to start over and build a new life, but also shows the persistence that people have to continue against all odds. The second work that I would invite you to investigate further on your own is Peter Hoffmeister's piece entitled Scrub. And this is a site-responsive audio piece that uses the Star-Spangled Banner as its source material. So what you see here on the slide is a picture of a card that he created. So when we were open and visiting the exhibit in person, we encouraged visitors to take the card with them, and on the back is a phone number. So this piece is an audio piece, and it can be accessed remotely by calling 929-277-1848. And to give a sense of what you're in store for with this audio piece, if you take a look at the visual that we have on the slide, this is a distorted image of the bald eagle. So to give you a sense of what the audio would be like, he takes the Star-Spangled Banner and applies an audio technique called scrubbing onto it. So it auditorially distorts the sound of the Star-Spangled Banner, and it really shifts our perspective and our associations with sound. So I definitely encourage you to give it a call and give it a listen. This piece by Tasha Duget, entitled Over Our Heads, highlights how the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 and the current actions of ICE are examples of how the government enacts laws and policies that separates families and removes access to civil liberties of daily life. And so that what remains is the idea of freedom dangling over our heads. This piece is constructed out of paper and wire. And so you'll see the top, the words freedom cut out. Also like showing a sense of that remove from the actual attainment of freedom. And at the bottom, there's some further information specifically about TPS, and TPS is temporary protective services, and this is extended to a few countries wherein if there's something like a natural disaster, people can come here to seek safety and then, can apply for a green card or immigrate here. But under the recent administration, TPS has definitely come under attack. And it further shows how this idea of freedom can feel very unattainable. And also in this piece, this artist has included some information about, or has drawn attention to Lewis's artistry. Lewis wrote poetry as well, among other things. And she's included his poem entitled A Happy Life in the piece. And this poem is, Lewis's own musings on what, what we're after. And I think, what makes this piece so empathetic and draws our attention to the universal nature of everyone's desire of freedom, everyone seeking better opportunities, a better life, showing that between Lewis and today, we're all still seeking the same thing. So this work here is by Jade Sacker, and it's entitled Beyond the Divide. This, which I have on the slide, is a photo from the book. So when we went through the video, you probably saw leafing through the pages of a photo book. This work is just 2 of the pages from the book, but Beyond the Divide offers an intimate insight into the sacrifices in one family. So this artist worked with a woman named Zoila, who is from Ecuador, and she migrated to the US, but left family behind, namely her son. So this project was a project in collaboration between the family and the artist, documenting this family's story of separation. And it also shows us some of the motivations of people who risk their lives in search of the American dream, and helps to debunk some of the divisive rhetoric and misinformation that we are receiving about people who are coming here just seeking a better life. So it's a very personal project, and it's very beautiful photographs. The next work is Carlisle Girls by Sheridan McKnight. This is a painting. It's gouache and ink on archival watercolor paper. And it features 3 girls in uniform, and it's entitled Carlisle Girls. It's in reference to the Carlisle School, which was a school that forced Indigenous people to assimilate. And this artist's work, this artist's family went to this school. So again, this is another personal work in the show. And in depicting these girls in this uniform, she also surrounds them with the eagle feathers, and that symbolizes and reflects the hope and sacredness of a people, and the hope of future generations. So how can we learn from the past and reflect and have a clear understanding of a new and positive culture? So also showing new beginnings. And for example, as a part of this assimilation process at this school, they'd be separating these children from their families and forcing them to cut their hair, cut ties to their heritage and their own culture and practices. So in combining this imagery in this way, Sheridan's asking us to see a different way. And then this piece by Sylvia Hernandez, A Message from the Children at the Border, is a quilt. Sylvia creates timeless handcrafted works that address community and human rights issues. And this piece, I think, is very powerful, and I think it needs no introduction, really. But as you can see here, she's chosen to use the silver thread that comes across in this pattern that evokes fencing to give a sense of the detention centers. And what she's saying is a very simple message. All my parents wanted was the same dream your ancestors had for you. This piece is in direct conversation with the viewer and begs them to see these children at the border with empathy and to have an understanding, a common ground that, you know, again, we're all looking for the same thing, and you know, to broaden our horizons and have and to work for understanding. And this next piece by Jean Park uses embroidery hoops, and she has taken she has taken Know Your Rights literature and embroidered it into these hoops. And in this comforts of home work, you know, in the face of ICE targeting the immigrant community, she's using embroidery as the medium. And this is typically regarded as a domestic hobby. And I think this marries very well with some of the subversive tactics that female abolitionists used, and that we've also seen in other women's rights or women's activism to take what is domestic and kind of relegate it to the sidelines or not taken seriously, and use that as an asset to spread awareness and create a plan and fight for freedom. So in choosing to use these embroidery hoops as the medium, she's also placing this work within a long lineage of activism. And this is the last work I'll share with you by Anne Lewis. So she had two pieces, the installation that was on the porch in the video, and then the last piece that was shown on the video as well. She uses emergency blankets, and in this piece, she's asking the audience to take a minute to reflect. So this is part of an immersive installation called Never Again is Now, and this work harnesses the power of visual reflection. And Anne's work offers the viewer a chance to leave messages to those detained in detention centers. So using this reflective surface while asking us to take time to reflect and to create a restorative action. And then her plan is to, once the show comes down, and she also has many more of these installations and pieces, she's going to take these messages, smuggle them into detention centers so that people will receive these messages of hope and resilience. And, you know, I think it's a great way to end this exhibition. In this room, we also have a wall of resources that are basically all of the organizations in New York State that do immigration advocacy work. So another way to ask the viewer and to give the viewer an opportunity to get involved, whether that is to, if they are needing resources personally, to have them, if they can pass it on, to pass it on, or even looking to donate, great place to look. So I think that pretty much wraps up our exhibition, Homeland. And we're really happy that you all spent your afternoon with us. If you have questions, again, please put them in the chat, and I will be looking at them and responding to your questions. You can also get in touch with me, education@lewislatimerhouse.org. I'll also put my email in the chat. And please take a minute to look at the exhibit on our website and spend some time. Thank you. Have a good rest of your afternoon and enjoy the rest of the Holly Tour.
Right. Thank you, Alex, and the Lewis Latimer House. So next up, we have Kingsland Homestead, which is the home of the Queen's Historical Society, where we're going to take a quick tour and make a craft. Welcome to Kingsland Homestead. Built in 1785, it is one of the last surviving examples of 18th century architecture here in Queens. Named by Captain Joseph King, a merchant sailor who used the land as farmland, he had purchased this house and land from his father-in-law, Charles Doherty, in 1801, and improved this Long Island half-house. Long Island half-houses are a common style of building here in Queens during the earlier colonial period. In this style home, the wide hallway is on the side, with large rooms in the middle, with a central chimney for heating. As I mentioned, Captain King added to the house, and eventually an extension was built. That's why there's a section on the other side. This is the kitchen wing that was added at the turn of the 19th century, and where eventually indoor plumbing was eventually added. Captain King's son, Joseph Harris King, married the daughter of a prominent nursery owner, James Bloodgood. Joseph Harris King then purchased a controlling interest in that nursery, and the Kings entered the nursery business. Joseph then moved the nursery to Kingsland Homestead, where it grew all varieties of trees. Flushing had many different tree nurseries, and was somewhat famous for it. Landscapers from all over the colonies would come to Flushing for the plants. Even customers like Thomas Jefferson would come to the nurseries like King's for projects like Monticello. The Flushing landscape was shaped by these tree farms. You can even still see the importance that trees had on the Flushing landscape by the street names. Traveling along Cassinia Boulevard, you will see that almost every street is named after a tree. The King family was Quaker, so they were staunch abolitionists and did not engage in slavery to help run their farms. Captain King's granddaughter, Mary King Murray, was a prominent participant in her local Quaker community and was a member of the Flushing Female Association. It is through her journal that we can learn about the happenings here in Kingsland. She talks about the births, deaths, and marriages in her circle of people, and also things like when water lines were first installed in the kitchen, when the telephone was first installed in 1903, or electric lights in 1906, or even the addition of stairs to replace the ladder to the third-floor apartment of Kingsland, where she lived. Here on the second floor, we have the Victorian room. By the 1850s, Joseph Harris King had brought his nephew, William King Murray, in to help with the business of the nursery. This room is modeled off the 1850s and the post-Reconstruction era. This room shows what the typical middle-class parlor would have looked like for a family like the Murrays. Most of the furniture here is not original to the house. However, this writing desk is, and would have been used to write many letters that people would use to communicate in the Victorian era. This is also where a lot of business would have been conducted, with ledgers, invoices, and everything needed to manage the nursery. The Murray family bet on the 7 line being extended in the 1920s, and even moved the house a few hundred feet to a more safe lot in 1926. They had also invested in some real estate to rent to commuters, but when the line was never extended into Murray Hill, and with the Great Depression on all of that, the Murrays had to sell the house. It was purchased by the Dixon family. In 1965, it was declared a New York City landmark. Threatened by development again, the Kingsland Preservation Committee was formed, and the house was moved to Weeping Beach Park in 1968, where it remains today. Today, it is the headquarters of the Queen's Historical Society. Weeping Beach Park is another source of beauty and interest around this home. Samuel Parsons planted the first weeping beech of the Americas here in 1847, and it lived until 1998. Parsons was another nurseryman here in Flushing, and his tree would become a living landmark, one of only 2 in New York City. The trees that live here today are descendants of that original tree and accompany a lovely park here in Flushing. So I'd like you to join us in making a holiday wreath this year, which we can use to kind of celebrate the fact that the Kingsland Homestead and many of the other historic locations here in Flushing are so closely intertwined with the tree nurseries that used to be here. So we're going to connect with that nature by making a wreath. So typically what you would do for these wreaths is you would take some local bendy twigs and sprigs and other kinds of wood that is flexible. Typically pine would be used, or in this case, this is a store-bought grapevine wreath. If you don't have any local materials, it's fine to go store-bought. But we'll use this as a base to make our wreath out of. So, first we're going to snip the tag off of this. And we're going to take our leafy green material. In this case, I've got some pre-made pine garland. And we want to wrap this around our wreath. So this will involve a lot of back and forth, but that is part of the fun. Now you can also go with a pre-made pine wreath. There are plenty of those around this time of year, but I wanted to go with something a little bit more handmade. Typically, if you're using a homemade material, then you'll need to use some floral wire to help keep things tightly wrapped together, so that way you don't have bits and pieces that fly out after the fact. Now once we've got our wreath made, we're going to fluff it up so that way we've got that green fluffiness kind of evenly distributed. And it's okay if you have a few bare spots, because we're going to be able to cover those up with things later. So, once you have your base wreath, we're going to go ahead and add some decorations. Now, I've chosen to use some holly because we have a lovely holly tree nearby. I'm going to take a few sprigs of this local holly, and I'm going to evenly distribute it by sticking the stems into our wreath. We want to get it in there nice and snug. If you're using artificial materials, it might be a good idea to go ahead and use some hot glue to keep things where you put them. You don't want them to shift around too much after the fact. So we want these nice dark greens to match the dark greens of our pine. We want to go with the matching color palette, and we want a nice red accent color with these berries. Whenever you're designing a floral arrangement, you want to keep in mind what colors you're using, so that way things match. So now we've got a little bit more volume going on, and we've got our berry picks nestled gently into our wreath. Now, you'll see that I still have a big empty spot down here. That's a bit intentional because we still have to make the bow. So, when you're making a bow, if you don't already know how to do this, you want a lot of ribbon. Because the more ribbon that you use, the more fluffy we can make it. So, I have these Chanel stems, or pipe cleaners, whichever you want to call them. And I'll want to pick either a green or a brown, a red or a black, but I think I'm going to go with a nice green one. And we'll use that to kind of keep our bow together. So first we need to decide how long our tail is going to be. And then we're going to scrunch up these loops. And we'll pinch them at the center. And we want to kind of go back and forth, because we want to hold it here in the middle, so that way when we add our pipe cleaner, that it will stick together. So I want just a couple more. Then, once we have this bunch, we'll need to twist our pipe cleaner in there nice and tight. Then we want to find our tail end, and then we will cut. Now, if you want to go for a fancy tail, you'll need to fold the ribbon in half, and then we'll cut on a diagonal. That will give you those nice pointy tails. So, one of the other benefits of doing this method of the bow with the pipe cleaner is now we have something to tie our bow onto our wreath with. So we'll find that spot that we want to cover up on our wreath, and we'll maneuver our pipe cleaner in there and get it nice and secure. There we go. Fluff. And then lastly, we'll want to take a special pick. So I've picked out a little bird pick, an owl. Get him back on his stem. So this little bird pick can go inside of our wreath as such. And now we have a beautiful wreath that we can hang on our door. The Queens Historical Society will continue to have virtual programs throughout the winter months. Please head to our website, queenshistoricalsociety.org, to find more information on upcoming programs, such as a presentation of the history and how to make piñatas, and another program on preparing Guyanese pine tart. We'll have film screenings of The Lost Spirits, a narrative on unheard voices of the Matinecock tribe, and Small Kitchens, an art film on cooking in the Elmhurst-Jackson Heights border by 7 Local Film. We're also in the process of switching over our 2 exhibits this winter, so keep an eye out for exhibits on Charles Dana Gibson, an illustrator, and a photography exhibit, Capturing Queens, on Percy Loomis Spear and Frederick J. Weber. We hope you have a wonderful winter, and that we can safely see you soon. All right, now our last house of this tour, Vocal Orth, which is an interesting gem with a beautiful interior and a beautiful exterior to match.
Welcome to the Volker-Orth Museum Bird Sanctuary and Victorian Garden. Thank you for joining us today for the virtual Historic House Holiday Tour. We're really glad that we can welcome you into our house. If you were here with me, you would smell our delicious mulled apple cider. You'd hear the bubble of people walking around and enjoying the house, and we're going to bring some of that program to you today. Thank you.
This is a special house and garden that has welcomed visitors for over 100 years. Nobody famous lived here, but a family came from Germany, built a business, bought a house to make a home, and witnessed Flushing growing from suburban fields into a bustling urban center. The family is gone, but they left their home to be a museum where visitors today can take a step back into a 19th century home where you can experience the period setting of a German immigrant family. The Volker-Orth brings together the traditions of old and new New Yorkers with the dash of history, a taste of the arts, and the beauty of a garden sanctuary. It's fun, it's experiential, it's in Queens.
Merry Christmas. Each year, we enjoy a Christmas sing here at Volker-Orth. Unfortunately, we're not able to do it. So we're going to, rather than you coming to us, we're coming to you. And I am pleased to have as an accompanist Mr. Kim Oler. His extensive experience is a benefit to us. I've known Kim for over 15 years. I sing with him at St. John's University. And each year, we have a lesson and carol that produces about 400 people attending. So like everything else, it's been canceled. So I'm so pleased that we're going to be playing and singing together today. Our first song is a traditional Christmas carol, Adeste Fidelis. Brings us to the modern age. I think it really represents how New York City celebrates and enjoys the Christmas time. We're now going to have Silver Bells. busy sidewalks, dressed in holiday style. In the air there's a feeling of Christmas. Children laughing, people passing, meeting smile after smile, and on every street corner you hear silver bells, silver bells. It's Christmas time in the city. Hear them ring, soon it will be Christmas Day. Strings of street lights, even stoplights, blink a bright red and green as the shoppers rush home with their treasures. Hear the snow crunch, see the kids bunch. This is Santa's big stage, and above all the bustle you hear silver bells, silver bells. It's Christmas time in the city. Ring-a-ling, hear them sing, soon it will be Christmas Day. Our third song goes to the history of the local Orth Museum. This is from Germany, and it's called O Tannenbaum. It really isn't a Christmas song. It represents the pine tree that is the symbol of Christmas. During the winter season, when the leaves have disappeared, the fir tree is green, and the aroma of the fir tree is so strong, it brings the aura of Christmas to us all. I'm pleased to bring you O Tannenbaum. Wie treu sind deine Blätter, O Tannenbaum, wie treu sind deine Blätter. Du bringst mir Frühs und Sommerzeit, nein, auch im Winter, wenn es schneit. O Tannenbaum, wie treu sind deine Blätter. Oh, Christmas tree, how lovely are thy branches. Oh, Christmas tree, how lovely are thy branches. Your boughs so green in summertime, to brave the snow of wintertime. Oh, Christmas tree, how lovely are your branches. So far, we've sung a song of Christmas, and we hear the sound. Our second song, Silver Bells, we see. And in O Tannenbaum, we feel the aroma of Christmas. Our fourth song was written by Henry Longfellow. He was the premier poet, essayist, and writer between the period, say, 1840 and 1870. He wrote Evangeline, The Courtship of Miles Standish, Hiawatha. And like most artists, he drew inspiration from things around him. But in 1861, he suffered a terrible tragedy. His wife accidentally was burnt, her dress caught fire, and even though he tried to put it out, By the next day, she had passed away from the scars and terrible tragedy. 2 years later, his son left his home in Massachusetts and traveled to Washington, D.C. to join the Army of the Potomac. He started as a ranked soldier and did so well, he was advanced to lieutenant. But in some anonymous battle, he was horribly wounded. The bullet was just an inch from paralyzing from his life, and his recovery was long and difficult. So when it came to Christmas time, he really wasn't in the mood. And he wrote how he felt, and I'd like you to see how he started at one point and ended at another. Please join us in I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day. I heard the bells on Christmas Day, their old familiar carols play, and wild and sweet the words repeat of peace on earth, goodwill to men. I thought how as the day had come, the belfries of all Christendom had rolled along the unbroken song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. And in despair I bowed my head, there is no peace on earth, I said, for pain is strong and not the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. And peal the bells more loud and deep, God is not dead, but doth he sleep. The wound shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men. With peace on earth, goodwill to It is now 1840. We're in the small town of Oberndorf. That's a little north of Salzburg in the Alps. 1840 in Europe, they were recovering from the Napoleonic Wars, and this was a poor town. But Christmas brings great joy. But they weren't having much luck that year, as the little river overflowed and damaged the organ, which was the centerpiece of their Christmas services. But Father Moore, the pastor, had written a poem about Christmas, and since necessity is the mother of invention, he went to the choir director, Franz Gruber, and asked, "Do you think you can put this to music on your guitar?" And in 15 minutes, he did so. This song has been played and performed in over 200 countries. I myself have sung it in French, Spanish, English, the original German. I even learned it in Croatian. Please join me in singing our final song, Silent Night.
So
straight from heaven afar. Heavenly hosts sing Hallelujah. Christ the Savior is born. Christ the Savior is born. Silent night, glory bright, Son of God, love's pure light, rain and beams from thy holy face, with the dawn of redeeming grace. Jesus wore that thy birth. Jesus wore that thy birth. Thank you for joining us. On behalf of Kim and I, let us wish you the safest and merriest of Christmas, and we hope that next year you can come to our house and join us. Be safe. Thank you.
Thanks for being with us this afternoon. The museum is virtual today, but for several days, December through February, we're inviting people back to our house. The first one is next Sunday, December 13th. We hope you can join us in the afternoon. We'll be doing some planting activity and house tours. Check our website or give us a call. Hope to see you here. Bye.
All right. I want to thank each and every one of you who came to help keep this holiday tradition alive. It was very nice to feel so much closer to all of you during this program. It's great to see people from all over Queens participating with us. People from Kew Gardens, Little Neck, Jackson Heights, and everyone who's talking in chat. And I hope to see each and every one of you guys at all of our various different sites soon. Have a happy holidays and have a good night.